Hello everybody. Let's now move into the multiple products break-even analysis. We have seen that at break-even point, always the total cost will equal to total revenue. So when you look at a multiple product company, let's assume that a company has three products A, B and C. So when you look at the break-even point, we must realize that there are three products and we need to consider the selling price and the cost of all the three products. So taking into consideration that at break-even point, the selling price will be, the total cost will be equal to the total revenue. Let's first understand what will be the selling price. Now when you look at a selling price, it is the selling price of product A plus product B plus product C. So which means the selling price of product A into the number of units of product A plus selling price of product B into the number of units of B and selling price of product C into the number of units of C. So this will denote the total selling price of all the three products put together. Now what is cost price? Cost price has two components, as we've seen, the fixed cost and the variable cost. In this case, the fixed cost remains the same for all the three products. We've already seen that graphically as well as theoretically, that fixed cost, irrespective of the scale of the products, the number of units or the number of products, it remains the same. Whereas the variable cost will be the total of the variable cost of all the three products put together, which means the variable cost per unit of A into the number of units of A plus variable cost of B into the number of units of B plus the variable cost of unit C into the number of units of C. So at break-even point, what have we seen? We have seen that selling price is equal to the cost price. So which means the selling price of product A into the number of units of product A plus selling price of product B into the number of units of product B plus selling price of C into the number of products of C should be equal to the fixed cost plus variable cost of A into number of units of A plus variable cost of B into number of units of B and variable cost of C into number of units of C. Now keeping taking the number of units of A outside, we have common factors as selling price by unit of A minus variable cost of unit of A plus taking out number of units of B outside, you have selling price of B minus the variable cost of B, and taking out number of units of C, you have the selling price minus variable cost of C, which will be nothing but equal to the fixed cost. Now similar to what we did for single product, we can take the, assuming the left hand side should be equal to the right hand side, we can take out the break-even quantity and the common factor would be the number of units of A by break-even quantity into the contribution margin of unit A plus the number of units of B by break-even quantity plus the contribution margin divided by unit of B by the number of units of C of the break-even point, and you have the contribution margin of unit C, which is equal to fixed cost. Therefore, the break-even quantity will be fixed cost divided by the sales mix percentage of A into contribution margin of A plus the sales mix percentage of B into contribution of B plus sales mix percentage of C into contribution of C. This is where we introduce the term called as weighted contribution margin per unit. Therefore, the break-even quantity will be given as the formula fixed cost divided by the break-even by the weighted contribution margin per unit. Right? Now, we can understand this with a simple example given here. We have a company which has three products, product A, product B and product C. Now it is given that the selling price of A is 15, the selling price of B is 21, the selling price of C is 36. Variable cost per unit is given as 9, 14 and 19. The sales mix percentage, that means the contribution of A product to the sales mix is 20%, of B is 20% and of C is 60%. It's also given that the total fixed cost is 40,000. Now we'll have to find out the break-even point in units and in rupees. What would be step 1? Step 1 would be to understand what is the contribution margin. Now we know that contribution margin or the gross margin is the difference between sales price per unit and variable cost per unit. So in this question, we have selling price given as 15 for product A and variable cost as 9 for product A. Therefore, the contribution margin of SP minus VC is 6. In the second case, the variable cost, the sales price is given as 21, the variable cost is 14, therefore the contribution margin is 7. In this case, selling price is 36, the variable cost is 19, so 36 minus 19 is 17. Now the second step would be to understand the weighted contribution margin. So the product A's contribution margin into the sales mix percentage. So here we've known that the sales mix percentage is given as 20%, 20% and 60%. So we consider that and get here what is the product A contribution margin into the sales mix percentage for A plus the product B contribution margin into the sales mix percentage for B, and then the sales mix for C and the product contribution for C. This will be the weighted contribution margin. So going back to the problem, we know that the contribution margin is 6, 7 and 17 respectively. The sales mix percentage is 20, 20 and 16. So what would be the total contribution margin? We get 20% of 6, 20% of 7 and 60% of 17. So we get 1.1, 1.2, 1.4 and 10.2. So this is the contribution margin of each of the product with respect to the sales mix percentage as given as 20, 20 and 60. Now please understand the sales mix percentage could also be given in the form of ratios. It could also be given in the form of units. So whether it is given in any form, whether it is in percentages or ratios or numbers, we always try to understand that we have to find the contribution margin with respect to the sales mix percentage in relation to the contribution margin that we have found. Now the next step would be to find the weighted average contribution margin, which is 1.2 plus 1.4 plus 10.2, which is 12.80. Step 3 would be to understand the total unit of sales mix required to break even using the formula. We always know that the break even point in unit of sales mix is equal to the total fixed cost divided by the weighted contribution margin per unit, or the weighted average contribution margin per unit. In this case, the fixed cost is given as 40,000. So the weighted we found out that the weighted average contribution per unit is 12.80. So the break-even formula will be equal to fixed cost divided by sum of weighted contribution margin, which is 4,000 divided by 12.80, which is 3,125 units. Now please understand this is the break-even point in terms of units. We can also find the break-even point in terms of value. So which means we multiply 3,125 units in relation to the respective sales mix percentages, which we can see as step 4. Now we know that the sales mix percentage of A is given as 20%, which is 20% of 3125, which is 625, 20% again of product B, which is 625, and 60% of product C, which is 1875. So when you see the total, this will be equal to 3125, and the contribution for each of the product is understood. Now when you want to calculate the break-even value or the break-even point in rupees, then we know the selling price of A is given as 15. So the product A will have 625 units into 15, which is 9,375 rupees, and for product B the selling price is 21, so this break-even value is 13,125, and for product C is 36, so we get the total break-even value at 67,500. Now we've been asked to find the break-even value of the company together for all the three products. So we sum total of 9,375 for product A, 13,125 for product B, and 67,500 for product C will be equal to 90,000, which is the break-even value for that company. There is one more concept which I need to introduce you at this point in time, which is called as the profit volume ratio or the PV ratio. Now the profit volume ratio establishes the relationship between what we now call as contribution and the sales value. So the formula can be expressed as PV ratio is equal to contribution by sales, and we know that contribution is selling price sales minus variable cost by sales. So contribution is nothing but sales minus variable cost, so the PV ratio is contribution divided by sales. Let us understand this with a simple example. Sales is 2 lakhs, variable cost is 1,20,000, fixed cost is 40,000, so PV ratio will be contribution by sales. Contribution is sales minus variable cost, which is 2 lakhs minus 1,20,000, which is 80,000, divided by 2 lakhs, which is the sales, so which is always expressed in percentages, so 0.4 into 100, which will be 40%. So the break-even value in the terms of PV ratio will be fixed expenses divided by the profit volume ratio, or fixed expenses divided by the contribution sales. This brings us to the end of the segment called as break-even analysis. There are certain assumptions for break-even analysis. We must understand that these assumptions are key to estimate the break-even point for any company. First, the proportion of sales mix must be predetermined. The sales mix does not change with the relevant time period, and all costs are categorized as fixed and variable. The sales price per unit, the variable cost per unit, and total fixed cost are a constant, and we also assume that all units produced are sold. Thank you for tuning in to Break-Even Analysis.